No mai haere mai kia koutou katoa. Thank you very much for joining us today on our Give to Gain panel, where we're looking to share knowledge and actions that you can take to grow your wealth and take control of your finances. I'm delighted to be joined by some amazing women this morning to talk about all things financial well-being and insights. And so it is my pleasure to introduce my fellow panelists today. But before I do, let me just give a little bit of a disclaimer that everything we're going to talk about today is for information purposes only, and the content of this presentation doesn't substitute regulated financial advice. So if you need some further advice, we'll give you some details at the end about how you can get in contact with the appropriate people. But let me start off by introducing the panelists that I've got joining us here today. Firstly, I would like to welcome Katie Wesney, a financial advisor and coach here at Enable Me, and also a columnist for Staff Magazine. Good morning, Katie. How are you?
I'm very well. Very pleased to be
Awesome.
here.
Awesome. And then we're also joined by financial journalist and Making Sense podcaster, Frances Cook.
Hello.
Hello. And also Xin Yin, who is a financial advisor and workplace advisor with AMP New Zealand. Good morning.
Good morning. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so lovely to be joining you all this morning. Well, I say this morning, it's just on lunchtime, but great to have you all here. And I'm really looking forward to having a bit of a chat this morning because it's always fun. I love doing panels and I really enjoy these sessions when we all get to kind of get together and have a bit of a chat. So we've had a lot of questions come through, and I'm sure some more may come through the course of today. So I'll try and kind of weave those in at the same time. So if anyone's got some questions, by all means kind of pop them in the Q&A box. But let's kick off because there's lots of things to talk about, and I love the opportunity of thinking about how we can kind of give back some of that knowledge and talk about all of our experience. And between us there is a ton of experience working in this sector. And so let's start off in a really topical area. And Katie and Francis, when we called up earlier in the last week, we were chatting about the good old property market, because that's always a topic of conversation here in New Zealand. And one of the things that people really want to get some information about is, as women focused on kind of trying to buy their first home, and Katie, maybe I'll start with you. Often it's a really challenging sort of thought process about how do I go through getting all the financial foundations in place to make that first leap in terms of getting on the property ladder. Because we're being told in the media that it's getting harder and harder to actually get onto the property ladder. And obviously, the average age of first home buyers in New Zealand is creeping closer and closer to that 40-year-old mark.
Yeah, such a good question. And I think, like anything you're doing financially or other, really, I think it's got to be part of a broader plan. And to facilitate buying that property, you've got to have really clear goals and foundationally, really understanding your cash flow, cash in, cash out, what's left over. Have good support structures around that because that dictates what you can afford and what will be sustainable to your overarching plan going forward so you can still live a good life. Really important.
And so for a lot of people, it can be that hard decision about, can I buy solo or should I buy with a partner?
And I think that you have to know your numbers. That's really important. But I would say you have to buy with someone who matches your financial values and goals, not just someone you love. I've seen that play out not well when people aren't on the same page, and you must protect yourself if there is unequal capacity or what you're contributing is unequal. You have to get a relationship property agreement. Like, please take those rose tinted glasses off.
Yeah. So really think about what your kind of equity share could be in that
A hundred
property.
percent, a
Okay.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
very,
And
very important.
And that can be quite a difficult conversation to have. But like, what are some of the things that you would suggest to someone having in that conversation?
Well, I think you have to. I think that's a red flag, Carla, actually. If you are uncomfortable and you can't bring that up with your partner, I very much doubt you should be buying a property with them. I'll point that out first. And I think genuinely, in the thousands of conversations I've had with equally respectful partners, they want their other partner to be protected as well. I think that's super important. Would you not agree, Francis?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I couldn't agree more with what you're saying there about the red flag there. If you're not able to have those sorts of conversations,
Yeah.
and I say this to people as well who are sometimes considering buying with a friend even. If you're
Yes.
looking at having this big asset together, this huge financial commitment, for a lot of people, buying a home is one of the biggest financial decisions they'll make.
Yeah,
So if you can't have an honest conversation about what do we do if it all goes wrong? Quick, let's get some stuff down on paper. Let's go chat to a lawyer who's neutral and unbiased and can just walk us through some, worst
yeah,
case scenarios. What do we do if that happens? Can we have an honest conversation about finances, how this all works? If you can't do that, whether it's with a friend or a partner, I don't know if that's the right decision. That's a really good litmus test for whether it's a right decision to be buying with that person.
yeah.
100%.
That's fantastic advice, ladies. So sometimes, like, it can be a really tricky decision about buying versus renting. And so there can be situations, Francis, where renting can make more sense. And so in this current market, like, when is it a better opportunity to actually rent a property as opposed to buying a property?
Yeah, and it's funny, isn't it? Because I do think overall, top line is that buying a house and paying it off is fantastic for your financial future. The devil is in the detail there, though, of the timing is everything. And just because it can be a really good thing to buy a house doesn't mean it's necessarily the right thing for you to buy a house right now. And the example that I often think of is, people in their 20s maybe. That might be a time when you're actually investing into your career, into your earning power. And when I think about my career in my 20s, I moved city 3 different times.
Yeah,
And if I was trying to buy and sell a house in that time, I A, probably would have lost money. And B, it would have really slowed things down and maybe made that job hunt harder. So
yeah,
renting can be great for when you need that flexibility for your life goals. I would say, though, doesn't mean that you have to ignore your future money plans. It doesn't have to mean that you ignore your wealth building. Investing into something like shares or boosting up your KiwiSaver in that time instead can be really good. You can still have your future wealth plans. It just might not be a house at that time.
yeah,
Yeah, and what I always think, Francis, when people think about, even buying their first home, it
Mm.
doesn't necessarily have to be the house that you live in. It actually could be or make more financial sense for it to be an investment property. And because the math stacks up better, I always think about these beautiful clients I had. They had this amazing rental, cheap as chips near Takapuna Beach. And when you did the maths of buying the equivalent, it was absolutely extortionate in terms of mortgage rates, etc. So they kept renting right near Takapuna Beach and bought a rental in Hamilton. So I think it's being really understanding your numbers, having that plan, and keeping yourself open to all options.
yeah. Yeah, perfect. And so I think what's really important as well is that I think, there is also an increasing amount of women who are single and confidently entering the property market. So, Sing and I had a chat about it because we're both women who have gone out and bought property on our own. And so you're seeing an increasing number of women do that. But Katie, maybe you want to talk to, because I know it's a chat that you and I had when I came to do it, some of the things that you kind of need to think about if you want to do it on your own and you're going to be on one income when you do that process of going out and buying a property on your own.
Yeah, and I always, and I know we had this conversation. You've just got to be more prepared, not less ambitious. So it's
Mm,
absolutely doable. But again, you've got to know your numbers through and through in terms of your plan, the cash flow impact, and how it fits in with your other goals in terms of juggling the job,
yeah,
family, other investments, and retirement. And you've got to have protections in place.
yeah, the
So
risk.
yeah, the risks in terms of, insurance around your income thereafter, having a good buffer, I think that does make you feel more confident when you do enter in those, as Francis said, really big transactions.
Yeah.
Mm,
So I mean, obviously, property investing is a really popular way to sort of to get ahead, but it doesn't mean it's the only way to get ahead. And
100%.
one of the things, we've talked about property, but investing is also really popular. And statistically, women invest less than men do. But Sing, obviously, you come from a background working in A&P where we work with a lot of people who are involved in investing. How do you think we can change that confidence piece around women getting more confident in investing? Because they're actually really good at investing.
I love that question. So you're right, women are really good at investing. We just need to back ourselves. So generally speaking, women compared to men are a lot more conservative, and we're very, very good at saving. So what we need to become better at is asking for help, getting the knowledge that we need, empowering ourselves, and just getting started. So often we wait to be confident to get started, but in actual fact, if we can just take little micro steps and get started, that's how we build our confidence. And the good news is most of us are already investing because we have KiwiSaver. So
So
if we
true.
can make little tweaks and changes, such as either increasing our contributions or reviewing our fund, that can just make a really big difference over time.
That's a really, really good point because I suppose I can see that in myself, like that risk aversion piece. And so some of those conversation points have to be around kind of that risk tolerance piece and understanding how much time you've got to play with. Um, and so when a beginner starts investing with limited capital, like
hmm
what are you kind of looking at? Are you looking at those kind of timeframes to invest, and if you've got a longer time frame, what does that kind of give you as an opportunity?
Generally, when people start investing, we're looking at three aspects. We are looking at the goal, and the goal will determine the time frame. So if I'm saving for a holiday, for example, a big OE or second OE, in my case, that might be 3 years away. So that's a relatively short time frame. In that case, if I was investing for or saving for that, I would want something relatively conservative so that there isn't too much volatility. And if I was to achieve that goal sooner, I can actually have the ability to withdraw irrespective of market performance. If I had a bigger goal, say I wanted to build my property portfolio, that's potentially further down the track. In that case, I have the ability to withstand any market downturns, such as right now what we're going through at the moment. And in that case, then the funds that I'm invested in can be a lot more growth orientated because I don't actually need that money and I can withstand the downturns a lot better.
Yeah, no,
I think
that's
that's
fair.
such a good point. And I think that often in conversations, risk tolerance, it kind of feels like almost it should be about personality, but it's absolutely not. It's actually more about timeline, exactly what you're saying, Sing.
So when you are working with people, Katie, like how do you balance that long-term kind of sort of investing strategy versus like those shorter-term financial goals?
Yeah, so for my clients, we're kind of automating for that kind of long-term investing first, and then kind of building the short-term goals around what's left. And I think often the thing that makes a plan sustainable is balance and really understanding what's important to you. We often talk about three non-negotiable costs. Um, for me, just giving you an example, that's travel, coffee, and my kids' activities. If I can do those, I'm okay with that. I put upper limits around that, and then I channel everything else as productively as possible in terms of my longer term goals, which might be paying off a mortgage, buying other properties, or investing in funds. Does that make sense in terms of
Yeah,
balance
totally.
and sustainability? Yeah.
Yeah. And
Mm,
Francis is like a key sort of commentator in this space because there's a lot of people out there commenting around investing and you know there's a lot to be said in the investing space. Like it's become a really popular space for people to talk about on a lot of platforms. How do you get through the confusion, because everyone wants to kind of have some sort of opinion on what you should do? Like one week it's kind of like commentary on gold, the next week it's we don't talk
silver.
about Bitcoin. Yeah, we don't talk about Bitcoin as much as we used to. But do you know what I mean? Like it kind of is like in our social media sort of world that we live in. I kind of feel like investing's got like everyone kind of feels like they should have an opinion on investing.
Noisy.
Yeah,
It's got really
so
noisy
noisy.
and it's got so controversial. It's kind of funny because my 18-year-old daughter is kind of like having commentary with me about investing. But I feel like whilst it's become really topical, it's almost like, as an older woman, like everyone talks to you about eating protein and everyone feels like they should have commentary about investing these days. And it's kind of like, but it still feels really uninformed because when you get below
Mm.
the layer of talking about investing, it's kind of like, I just feel like the nuts and bolts of it is lost. So
Yeah.
how do we actually empower people? Because I think like it's really cool because we now talk about it, but I still don't feel like we understand it.
Yeah, and it's funny that, isn't it? Because I so agree. We live in this world of hot take machines. Anyone who's got a TikTok account knows
I
it's an
know.
absolute hot take machine. You
Yeah,
just scroll, there's a hot take on this, a hot take on that, and who are these people? Do they know what they're talking about?
I know.
80% of them probably not.
Yeah,
Um,
Not
so
more.
chlorinate our information
I know.
swimming pool
I know.
maybe a little.
Yeah.
So I think what I try to do is I'm a big believer and I'll take in all of the information that's around, but I'm really clear on my hierarchy of information and I make sure I go to seek out the good places first because the places that have the best information are often not the places where it will land in front of your face thanks to an algorithm. What works on an algorithm is really emotional stuff, which means often stuff that makes you angry or fearful or happy or excited, all of which is death for your money. Emotions and money should never mix. That's oil and water. But the stuff that works there is not what's going to be good for your cash. So I will seek out carefully curated news sources, and you don't want to take too much that's in the headlines as gospel because there is a little bit there, but it is at least there's more vetting there, far more vetting there than social media. And there's some very, very smart people like Katie who are, regular columnists and bring a bit of sense to the world. And so there's great information there,
Mm.
check the credentials of people who are talking. And if you're signed up to things like I know that you guys have great newsletters where you put out information, if you're getting information from financially qualified people, then that's obviously far better. But I think it's not just, so it's first vetting your information sources and making sure who this person is. Are they qualified? Do they know what they're talking? Are they trying to put in too much emotion? That's a huge red flag. But not just that, but also, limiting how much access you have to that because sometimes even if
Yeah.
the information is good, it can still just be overwhelming. And my thumb has got an absolute workout scrolling through the headlines the last week. It's crazy out there. But I'm also being really careful that I'm checking in on the headlines in the morning and in the evening and not in between. And that's as someone whose job it is to stay informed. I read far more news than the average person probably needs to.
Yeah, yeah, of
And so
course.
I do put myself on an information diet because you don't want to feel flustered. You don't want to feel overwhelmed. All of that will push you to make choices that aren't going to work for you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good answer. And I mean, Katie, like we've talked about investing and we've talked about property. And I think what's a really interesting question that's come through is like we've talked about them as two things in isolation. And I think when we talk about a lot of that information that comes to us in a social context, it's in snippets. So it's talking to
Mm,
us about one thing in isolation. And so one of the questions that's actually come through is like, what is the ideal sort of split around property shares and KiwiSaver? And I think that that is a really good question because, and another question's come through like, when's the ideal time to sell a property and all the rest of it? And I think you can kind of wrap those questions together in the sense that ideally you can't look at any of these things in isolation. Katie, maybe you can kind of talk to it.
yeah, you really can't. And I think that understanding where people are coming from who are delivering the message is really important as well, because the stuff that works, and Francis and I often comment about this, is fundamentally very boring for me to tell. And so fundamentally, what works for most people is spending less than you earn, investing in a whole myriad of assets, having your own home, paying it off, investing in funds, property, having that KiwiSaver. It's having an element of all of those things insulates you and ensures you have a really holistic plan that's going to serve
Yeah.
you for longer term.
And the right time to sell and release equity and the right mix really depends on when you need the
Your
money. The
goals. Yep,
the liquidity
yep,
piece, it really depends on your plan, like when you need the money
yeah, yep,
and
yeah,
how an asset's performing is when the right
yeah,
time to sell
yep,
it. So we
absolutely.
can't
Yep.
tell you the right time because it comes down to what's right for your
Yeah,
scenario.
but there are some things that you think about in
Yeah,
terms of the question, which again, very boring in terms of what are your goals? Has this asset served me and will it serve me through another cycle? So that's again,
yeah,
sometimes, there's that old adage, you never sell a property. That is absolutely not true. We're thinking about, is the capital that's wrapped up in that property, is it going to serve you through that next cycle? Or should it be divested, invested in something else? That is really what you're looking at, and that's in that broader context of your plan. So for someone
yeah.
who's in retirement, they maybe want to just reduce static. They might want a little bit more diversification and liquidity. Someone who's younger might want to swap it out for a better performing property. There's no one answer that's going to fit everyone. It's what is right for you and your plan
Yeah.
going forward.
Which is a really, really good point, actually. Which brings us to like we've talked a little bit about kind of plans and where you're sort of going towards, and ultimately the kind of like the end game for a lot of us is actually retirement. And at the moment, a lot of New Zealanders are kind of thinking about that plan quite near quite near the end of the race. But any marathon runner would know that that plan actually needs to start quite near the start of the race, and it needs to be kind of well planned out. So what you've just spoken to there is knowing how to use all of those different levers at the right times in the race. And so I guess where I kind of want to start with is firstly, like ideally, retirement planning. When should we start thinking about it, Sing? Because that's a really common question. I guess I've kind of almost half answered it, but you work with people, particularly in the workplace, at all ages and stages. And I guess, what would be your recommendation for women and men in terms of thinking about where we should be starting this retirement conversation?
Absolutely. Before I answer that question, I actually just want to round out what Katie said.
Oh,
So,
sorry. Yeah, jump in.
I know that's okay. So, I absolutely 100% agree with you, Katie. One of the things about having different asset and diversifications is they don't move at the same time. So,
Mm,
if we are able to build a portfolio where there is diversification, then we're often protected from movements and cycles. So that's really, really important. And the other thing that you've actually written about this, that we've spoken about this recently. And one of the articles was when is the right time to sell? From my own personal experience, the right time for me to sell was so that I could release equity from my property to buy myself freedom and build a side hustle. This is before AMP, so just
yeah.
just to be very clear, this is before AMP. Um, so believe it or not, the property I sold, I didn't actually make any profit from it. I actually made a very small loss. But at that point in time, it was important to me to have the freedom
Yeah.
to build that side hustle. So the right time is really dependent on our lifestyle and the choices that we make.
Yeah,
That's
and
a
I
great
think
story.
it's so true, and I love that. And I think everyone brings this unique experience, and everyone has different experiences. And honestly, so easy to say, isn't it? Well, start in your 20s, but actually, you start now. And
Yeah.
I love languaging, which is always why I love all of Francis's stuff. But I read this quote today, and I'm going to read it because I think it's so true. Like, you really have to forgive yourself now for not knowing earlier what only time could teach you. And I think as you get older, you learn such rich, good lessons. And that's the tricky thing, right? You learn more from what goes wrong than what goes right, but you
Yeah.
catch the lesson, you don't do it again, and you move forward. I'm always drawing lines, but we drew a line in the sand and we concentrate on what comes next. And I think that's really important for everyone, but particularly for women to grasp, because we are so harsh on ourselves. But actually, you can't change what's happened. You look to the future and learn good lessons.
Yeah, there's a
Love
very
that.
similar Oprah quote that says, "When you know better, you do better." And I
Totally.
think I've always really liked that because I think it pretty much echoes the same thing.
Mm,
So yeah, Sing, I think that's great feedback. But what I would say is moving on to kind of talk a bit more about retirement. Um, in terms of this kind of retirement piece, what we're seeing is that a lot of people are starting to slowly think about how to bring pieces of assets together. But the question is, how do we ensure that women are thinking about retirement planning differently? So, Sing, in terms of the people that you are working with, because you do a lot of work in that space, particularly working around KiwiSaver, which is probably the linchpin that we have around retirement planning at the moment. What do you think women need to think about specifically in regards to their retirement planning?
So women often take time out of our careers to be caregivers, whether that's to have children, to care for elderly parents, or there's other things often going on in life. So, what we need to take into account is that our earning capacity is actually reduced from a time frame perspective. And that has quite a long-term impact because it's not only reduced pay, reduced contribution to our KiwiSaver, but it also has a compounding growth effect
Yeah.
as well. So, what that means is really thinking about and planning ahead and being able to execute. So, if we are taking time out to have children, for example, we need to make sure that we're opting in to KiwiSaver contributions so that we get the matching from the government if we're taking parental leave. And I guess the other thing I often talk to women about is also get your partner or your other half to contribute to your KiwiSaver. Having children and creating family is a joint decision. So get them to take part in your own growth as a
I've never
family.
thought of that. That's a really, really nice one.
And often also men, I don't want to talk about gender pay gap too much, but realistically, there is still a difference as well between what we earn as women and also what men earn. So we need to make sure that we're asking for our worth. So to Karla, basically making sure that if it comes to asking for pay rises, that we have the courage to ask for what we're worth and have those uncomfortable conversations. Because you imagine if we are taking time out and we come back, there's already a delay for a number of years. So we need to make sure that moving forward, that there is a bit of a catch up. Asking for a pay rise is one of the strategies for wealth creation because it impacts the next role, it impacts bonuses, it also impacts our superannuation contributions. So I guess in terms of the moral of the story is start early, start thinking about retirement early. And also, if we are taking time out, maximize the contributions from the government as well as our partners and start now.
Yeah, look, I think that's really clever. I had not actually thought about the maximizing contributions from partners, and I think um, that whole piece around just considering sort of having a plan in place is a really creative strategy. Katie, is there anything or Francis that you kind of want to add to that piece around just retirement considerations, particularly for women?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point in terms of like you have to keep in mind that we are on a truncated timeline.
Yeah,
Um, and it is often whether or not you choose to partner up and have a family, there's all sorts of things. I mean, women are often also the ones who are tapped to be carers for their parents if they
correct.
need, any help there. And we, of course, have the gender pay gap, which does get worse with children, but it's there before children too. Um, so I think we can do what we can to address those things from a wider society standpoint, but also what's really important is as individuals saying, okay, you get dealt a bit of a bum hand sometimes. Now what can you do about it? And for
Correct.
me, I often I have started referring to myself as a passive aggressive investor.
I love
In
that.
terms of
Love
I
it.
do invest really aggressively. I love the share market. I go really hard on it. Um, I think you can get amazing returns there. But the strategy that I use to throw as much money as possible into the share market is quite passive, quite boring. It's funds, it's really lazy, and I just get it done and I make sure I get it done. It is so much of your finances is brushing your teeth every day. It's doing the thing you know you need to do every day, doing it regularly. And so I make that commitment to myself. If the world is unfair, there are some things that I would like to be part of the solution for. And if we could see the pay gap reduce in my lifetime, I would love that. I'm not going to rely on that. I'm going to do what I can to level myself up, and I'm going to do it today. Even if it's a $5 difference, awesome. Lock it in. Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I couldn't agree more with you both. And you have to be deliberate and you've got to take your power back. And I I think as you often have career breaks, etc., never and at any time never defer your power to someone else in a relationship. I see this so often, and it can be a man, it can be a woman, whereby one person is just running blind because they think that the other person is better with money. That is absolutely generally not the truth, and you've got to make sure that if you are together, it is a joint plan. Never assume your partner's retirement is also going to be yours. There really has to be that collective engagement to ensure that everyone lands where they should. Really important.
And
Yeah.
another thing which is not it's not specifically a kind of issue related just to women. I think it's related to all families, but how do you kind of balance those childcare costs as well at the same time as you are going through that period of trying to build your finances, etc.? Like, is that something that you also build into your plan? Because I know for a lot of women, that's a really it's not just hard for women, it's hard for families because
Mm.
you're taking that double hit. So is that just something that you build into your overall plan, or what's your thoughts around that?
Francis, you're in the thick of it. You can speak to
Yeah.
Yeah,
this.
I was gonna
exactly.
say I have so many thoughts on this. I was like, Katie will have thoughts, but I'm jumping in right after. But I'll jump in first for sure. I think the thing is, it's really interesting with the childcare thing because I have so many people. I'm very lucky to have so many wonderful listeners and readers of my work who then get in touch and message me and ask me questions. So I get a real litmus test on what people are thinking. And I get so many women getting in touch and saying, "Is it worth me going back to work when childcare
Correct.
costs so
Mm,
much?" And I just sort of disagree with the premise of the question because, for one thing, I've never had a man compare his salary directly to childcare costs. It's
Correct.
always the woman's salary that is compared, and I'm just like, ladies,
outrageous.
we don't have to be the automatic one here. But I think the thing is, if you want to stay home with your kids, brilliant, love that for you. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
if you are making this choice based on the financials, I want you to make a broader view of that because it's not just, your salary now. It's if you take time out of the workplace, it is then harder to come back in at the level that you were. You often do take a little step down when you come back. Or, it's then harder to get the pay rises, the promotions. People who keep working that time probably do keep moving up. You have at the very least stayed still and possibly gone backwards. Again, if that is something you have deliberately and willingly chosen, beautiful, and include that as part of your financial plan with your partner. Have them on board. Maybe they could contribute to KiwiSaver on your behalf out of their salary. All those beautiful things. That's fine. But I want it to be a deliberate choice where you know that those things are a factor, that you're thinking about those future impacts as well, and that that's all part of it. And I just think if you make that decision purely on the financials of comparing your salary now, um, I would say that's the wrong way to do the numbers.
Yeah, I think that's a really amazing piece of advice, Francis, because I think you will tend to look at the economic state as it stands today, but it's just that foot holding that you lose. Like I took 6 years out, and the time it takes to kind of get back to where you were in 6 years. And I never regret that time, like most amazing time. But you're right, it's the build back period that is quite significant,
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
traction that you lose in that period of time.
Yeah, and I think also though, if you do make that decision, be deliberate, certainly understand the impact of the
Correct.
household collective, but I
Yeah.
think also you can be smarter about it, like keep your dipping your toes in terms of, professional networks, because
Yeah.
I actually think you've learnt amazing things being at home. It's not that you haven't stopped learning, etc., with the kids, but you've got to keep that confidence intact because I think that can take a bit of a hit just in terms of the workforce. So it's how do you kind of dip your toe in and not leave completely? I think that's often a kind of a good thing to have at the back of your mind.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mm.
And I suppose the other thing, which is, we've talked a lot about sort of what happens when you're in the situation with kids, etc. The other thing, which is increasingly challenging as well, is that we see a lot of women entering midlife, and it can happen earlier, where separation and divorce becomes, common as well. So for those people that then find themselves having to reset themselves up, what are some of the considerations for people who are having to start again midlife, Katie? Like we deal with a lot of women in that position.
Really do.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
my myself included, and
Yeah.
that advice piece has been really really important.
Yeah.
But some of
Yeah.
the considerations,
Yeah.
because it can be really hard to
Yeah.
have built that and then start
Yeah.
again.
Really hard, but in the same breath, I've
Empowering.
high five many a person, single woman, male, where it's like, mate, you steer the ship now. Game on,
Correct.
game
Correct.
on. And
Yeah.
often there is a drag in a relationship that isn't working well. So we cut that drag. So we're like getting excited about what comes next because
Correct.
wealth building is absolutely possible. It just requires more intention and there's less margin of error. So you know your numbers, you have a plan. And I think Singh mentioned this earlier. Confidence comes from competence. It's actually doing the things that need to be done, even though they're scary. And I think often having people in your corner who you trust really helps in terms of qualified advisors, etc., that they're part of your
Yeah,
team going forward.
absolutely.
That's really important.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always found that, I think it's knowing what you've got to work with and just making like really good strategic decisions,
And getting
can be really
excited, it is not doom and gloom. It is often not. It's like, right, we are here, we are excited, and we're going to do what needs to be
yeah.
done.
Yeah, it can be very empowering in terms of actually making a plan to go forward. I think that can be some of the hardest things to kind of deal with, is actually knowing what you've got to work with and making a plan to actually work with it. So, yeah. Um, what are some of the we talked about, we've sort of alluded to it, but I think it's some of the safety nets and things and the considerations when you're doing it on your own. So some of the conversations that we kind of have to have, and Sing, maybe you can jump in there as someone who has given advice, but like some of the considerations that we need to kind of put in place around investing, and also just the setups in place. Like we chatted about it, I mean, even the other day, saying like even with your KiwiSaver, it's having like things like the wills in place and all of that, all of those boring financial pieces like insurances and wills and all of that is always important when you're in a couple, but it's really important when you're on your own.
Absolutely. When you're on your own, you've got yourself to rely on. There isn't a safety net. So it's I've always advise people to make sure they get the basics right. So it's things like having your will, but it's also having income protection insurance and health insurance, because those things, if we lose our jobs or if we have a health crisis, can really set us back financially. Then there's other aspects such as saving. So we need to be saving around 20% of our income, ideally, if we can. And I've gone through stages of my life where, because I am quite a big spender, I've really had to prioritize.
You look great. You look great always.
Thank you. That's thanks to the spending. However, I've had times where I've had to really prioritize saving. And a big tip is when you are getting a new mortgage. So when you are at the start of a mortgage, most of the repayments that we make is actually going towards interest. There's very, very little principal repayments or paying off the original amount. So when I've taken out a new mortgage, I've always made sure that I've pulled back on the clothes and the shoes and really, really pay off the mortgage as much as possible. And I'm sure you can touch on it later, Katie, about the structure of the loan. But there's things like having revolving loan credits in place to be able to make sure we pay extra amounts off. Myself, when my loan comes up for renewal, I always make sure there's also lump sum payments as well. So it's doing the basics right and being consistent with that.
Yeah, as Katie said, more in than going out. And that can be,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yep.
unfortunately, there's some really boring parts to actually running good finances, isn't there, Katie? But it's good
Yeah,
just
just
finding good,
fundamental principles,
yeah,
which
yeah,
sound easy, but actually there's such a lot of baggage around it. And we understand them fundamentally, but what are the structures that we put around ourselves that
yeah,
help us
yeah,
achieve in terms of that foundation, which is not sexy. I appreciate that, but it's having good bank account structures that are automated,
yeah,
not using credit cards if you can. All those little things help protect you when you are tired and exhausted and have no energy to think about any of this.
absolutely. So one of the things, and I'm going to defer to you on this one, Francis, because one of the things that is so popular at the moment is we've talked a lot about ways that we can kind of, invest, we can optimize, we can look at what we're doing. But what has become really, really popular has been this whole concept of a side hustle. And well, Sing, we're going to come back to you in a minute, but we talked a little bit about how, everyone in the media talks about investing. But what is also really popular to talk about is I feel like in the 2020s, we've all got to have a side hustle. We've got to have a job, but we've got to have a side hustle to get ahead. And well, I mean, interesting talking to you, Francis, because your side hustle has now actually become your career. But what's your
Clever.
very clever. But what is your view? Like when does a side hustle make sense and when is it a distraction? Like do I
Yeah.
have to have a side hustle, Francis? Because I don't think I can have any more in my life.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Tired.
This is the thing, yeah. And I
Tired. I
think,
don't think I can do a side hustle as well.
yeah. And I think that is the case for a lot of people. I think there are times when a side hustle works so well, and there are times when it is actually potentially financially a bad thing because it can tire you
Yeah.
out and distract you from everything else. My first thing to anyone who's looking to earn more is invest in that main hustle first.
Mm.
You know, can you
Love
get a
it.
pay rise? Can you get a promotion?
Yeah.
Can you upskill yourself? What can you do to invest in your career? Because if you can increase the main hustle first, that is going to be more money for the same amount of effort. And
Phew.
that's what I love.
I feel like
Like,
I'm hustling enough.
yeah, exactly. Now, where a side hustle can really work is sort of sprint efforts. Like, maybe you want to change career, or you know that you're tapped out on what you can earn there, or you need extra money for a certain thing. You know, you're working really hard to save a house deposit. You
Mm.
really want to do it now, not in 5 years, and so you're trying to earn as much as you can, and it's a sprint effort. It's not a marathon. You can put in this extra effort for now. Or, you know, you want to launch a business, side hustle, great time to test that. So all of those times a side hustle can work. I just think a side hustle, if you're doing it for more than a year or two, you're going to get really tired. So main hustle first, side hustle for sprint extra efforts of I need something for this particular goal, or I want to launch a business but I want to test it on the side. Things like that, really great. But the idea of side hustling through my entire life, I feel tired just talking about it.
Good, because I'm already tired.
Yeah.
It makes me want to cry.
And
Talking
Katie,
too
we've
much.
we've we've also seen people who have side hustles, or and someone sort of asked the question before, like, how do you set up a business? But if we talk about small business owners, there's a real risk that you do side hustles or you work in your own business and it's not actually paying you the equivalent of a wage, and maybe you
Well,
kind of
yeah.
want to talk to that.
Yeah, I'll never forget this lovely guy came in. He's like, yeah, I just want to start my own business. I just want less pressure. I was like, dude, that is not the way.
Those two
And until you
sentences
can
don't work
testify.
together.
Yeah, yeah. The computer says no. Yeah, so I think that again, that's part of eyes wide open in terms of, are you buying yourself a job? How does this contribute as part of your broader plan? Because business done well, which I think Francis is a testament to, can
Yeah.
be life-changing and super rewarding, but it is really, really hard. And for
But you
most
work
businesses in New
hard.
Zealand, they
Yeah.
fail. So
Yeah.
understanding how you're made of and what makes you tick is really important. Like, you are the most important component of a financial plan. Understand who you are, who you're not, and craft a plan around it.
Yeah. And Sing, you said that you started a side hustle. Like, how did that work for you?
Well, I guess I'm back at, well, I'm employed again. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, look, for me personally, I'm a very risk adverse person. But there's stages in my life where I want lots of flexibility and I want growth. And
Good.
that's growth around skill set and learning. So basically, the time that I started this side hustle, I was trying to sell a rental property. It wasn't going particularly well. And then the agent I picked, lovely young man, but not particularly experienced, and it was a very difficult market. And as a result of that, I realized that I wanted to give it a go myself. So I wanted to become a real estate agent. And that's what I actually did. And before that, I was training to be a life coach. And I thought I could combine those skill sets and see what happens. And I guess the backstory is there was also lots of family things going on where involved real estate. So it was a great time for me to learn from my own mistakes, which I'm a big believer in. That's how that's how I
Yeah.
grow. And also it was just, my background is chartered accountancy. So not many people would believe that going from an accountant to sales and property and real estate, working with builders, electricians all day. But it was a really interesting journey and I've learned a lot. And that's partly why I'm here and partly why I'm such a big believer in diversification in different asset classes
I
because
love it.
I've,
I love it. And it gives so much flavor to, like, no experience is bad experience either, like, and
Yeah,
so I think that's
yeah.
fantastic. So
and
And life isn't linear. There's lots of flavors
no.
of life, and it's just not the case that you're in one job for life now. And it's collecting all of these experiences and just making sure that you live your best life and you make sure you're building something that's going to protect you into the future.
I think that's such
Absolutely.
a good point as well on the
Mm,
skills and that life isn't just, one career anymore. I mean, the job for life thing is so well and truly done now. But I saw something the other day, some really interesting analysis on the impact of AI, and that they were saying, one of the things that will become really valuable for the human worker is being able to have overlapping skill sets. And you're that little like beautiful Venn diagram and you're in the middle where you've got these
mm,
different skill sets and you
Yeah.
can connect different expertise. And I
Yeah.
do think, side hustles are amazing for building that, building up these different areas. So that is definitely a way to future-proof the career too.
mm.
And so I guess one thing I thought was quite interesting is, and it probably doesn't relate to finances or anything like that, but asking for a friend, i.e., myself, like, how do you think, and I'm going to ask each of you, that women can kind of like, we've talked a lot about all the things you can do today, um, but how do you protect yourselves from burnout while pursuing financial growth? I'm laughing because all four of us are like looking at each other going, yeah,
To speak
yeah.
from experience, yeah.
Asking for a friend, and we're all like going, if any of us have got a
Yeah.
tip,
Oh, high
like, yeah,
achievers in the room. Damn.
all achievers
Yeah.
in the room. We're
I can
like,
go. I can go first. I
you
can
go
go
first.
first. I can go first. Yeah. Hopefully, I'm not in my glass house and throwing stones.
Throwing stones.
But I think you just cannot build long-term wealth by burning yourself out.
Yeah,
You just can't. Sustainability is a
yeah,
financial strategy, and you have to look after yourself. That is probably the ultimate non-negotiable for every single one of my clients.
yeah,
And I think part of looking after yourself is ensuring that you don't let people take advantage of you. Like, don't put too much on your plate than is achievable. And often that's not just work, that's like uneven burden with the kids, parents. You have to get that balance right. And
absolutely.
you're working copious hours at, overtime, not being paid what you're worth, taking on the lion's share of kids' care. That just all fuels burnout. And that is probably the greatest disservice you do to yourself and your
Yeah.
overarching plan.
Sing, what about from your perspective?
There's a saying, health is wealth, and
Love it.
I
So
may or may
true.
not have experienced that. Um, Without our own physical, mental well-being, there is no capacity to build financial well-being and wealth. So it's really important that we prioritize saying no as well as looking after ourselves. So as someone who has been employed, had side hustles, changed careers, to be honest, it's been exhausting, absolutely exhausting. And I guess this season of my life, I want to be able to say no more and also just really prioritize my own well-being so that I can move forward and create and be even better.
That's fantastic. And Francis?
I think the big thing for me is it's so much of this comes back to community. And there's a quote, I caught this line from Jimmy Carr, and it's so good. I've been telling everyone about it. You drop one human into the jungle, you've just fed the animals. If you drop in 10, you've just dropped in an apex predator. And I really think that's so true. Our great
True.
strength as humans, we're kind of useless animals, but our great strength that has powered us through all of human history has been our ability to work together and share
It does.
resources and share
Yeah.
strategies. And
Yeah.
particularly women, damn, we are good at this. I don't know how any
Mm,
woman gets through without her crew. And sometimes you're in a busy season of life and that crew lives in the group chat in your pocket because you're too busy to even see them, but you're still chatting to each other, you're still helping each other, you're still sharing strategies. And I just think, whether it's your career, whether it's your family, whether it's your financial strategies, sharing tactics, sharing problems, sharing solutions is huge. And we're really, really good at it. And we're often looking for the silver bullet tactic, but sometimes actually sharing and getting that stress off your mind, A, that's huge in itself. But B, then when you're just talking to each other and you're picking up little bits all the time, that can build up and be really, really huge for helping you build a strategy that helps you navigate what can be a tough life sometimes. There's always a lot of pressure on, there's always a lot to be balanced. But when you talk to other people about how they're handling it, you don't know what you don't know, right? So I think community is huge.
And not
I
feeling
think,
alone. Like, I think, often
Yeah.
we think, oh, it must be just me. But it's like, it's the vast majority of us in terms of kind of hopes, dreams, fears, etc. So I think
yeah,
not feeling
yeah.
alone is so important.
Agreed. And I guess I'll round it out by saying that I think as women, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be able to do everything simultaneously. There's a great analogy, and I'm trying to remember whose it is, but there's something called the four burner strategy, where there are four burners, one being your family, one being kind of your health, the other being your career, and the other being your friends. And there's a tendency to think that we can have all four burners running simultaneously. But if anyone, I'm a bit of a cook, knows it's very hard to have all four elements kind of cooking simultaneously. So one always has to give. And so I think it's just accepting that you can't do all things perfectly at the same time. So if you're throwing everything into work, maybe that's the week that you're not the perfect mother for your children, and vice versa, and that's okay. That's okay. That's normal. And when it comes back to finances, we're not always going to get it right. But there needs to be time and places where we sit back and we kind of, there are times and places where we can sit back, let the strategy just do what it needs to do. And then there are times and places where we need to sit down and put some attention to it, because um, it's a bit like dieting. It's not going to be perfect all of the time, but as long as we get it right a lot of the time, then it will serve us well. So um, I will wrap us up there and say thank you everyone for joining us today. It's always good fun having a bit of a chat with the ladies. Thank you all for taking your lunch break today to catch up with us. For those of you who would love to learn a bit more from Frances, please take the opportunity to subscribe to her newsletter or join her on the Making Sense podcast. For anyone that's joined us from one of the workplaces that AMP supports, please reach out to the team at AMP. We do a whole lot of stuff that we can assist you with in the workplace, and we also work with a whole lot of presentations, etc., some for women's groups, etc. So we'd love to come and join you, and please reach out to your partnership manager. And in the meantime, if you would like to chat to us about your individual finances, we'd love to help you here at Enable Me. So please feel free to contact us at the code on the screen. So in the meantime, I want to thank our panelists, Frances, Katie, and Sing, and I wish you all a wonderful International Women's Day for 2026. See you all soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.